Hi everyone, my name is Paul Caggegi. I'm a Sydney-based motion graphics designer and illustrator. And I use Blender both for professional purposes as well as personal ones. And my personal project at the moment is a 3D, well, not 3D, but it's a webcomic called Pandeia, which is also available in print. The first 4 issues are available online to read for free. And you can go to pandeia.com to see how I actually integrate Blender into my workflow. Here's a couple of example pages of the combination of 3D and 2D. You can pretty much tell what is 3D a little bit. I mean, if you can take a look at the top left-hand corner, there's a building that's obviously 3D, a ship that's 3D with a drawn background. On this side, all of the bikes are the same element that have been duplicated and set up in a scene, rendered out, and then composited in Photoshop, over which I then did all the 2D work. But to get a good 2D look out of Blender, I needed to rely both heavily on the compositor and Freestyle. I've obviously gone over a little bit about me. That's where you can find Pandeia. There's the logo. I launched it in 2010, so for 3 years I've been working on maybe 4 issues, and I've got another 2 coming out, hopefully by the end of this year, which will constitute book 1. But between freelancing and family, I quickly learned that I needed to use my spare time as effectively as possible. And I had 3D skills. I'd been using Blender pretty much since about version 1.8. I think I remember it didn't have an undo, and it was really hard to sell to my boss. Say, hey, there's this really neat package, but you can't undo if you make a mistake. It's come a long way since then. But using my 3D skills to produce comic content really sped up my process. So here's a little bit of my workflow. You can see up in the top left-hand corner, I've got a concept sketch that I generally do my concepting on the train when I'm commuting to clients. And then there's a 3D render of the objects just basically lit. And here is a completed page where you can see that object in situ with 2D characters, and it's lit and it's on the page with text bubbles and everything. And I think it works quite well. Here's another example. Hopefully it's not too dark. First of the concept sketches, then the model. For some reason, I really like the renders you get out of just plain AO, ambient occlusion. They always look kind of cool, like clay. And then the compositing nodes that were set up for this particular picture. There's a lot going on there, but I hope to have a little bit of time to take you through it. Here are a few more model shots. This was an object that I had to create for a room. And up the top, you can actually see the concept sketch on the page that I worked in GIMP, and then the completed product down here with that model using a few modeling techniques like mirror and arrays and duplicates and so on. All right, so obviously, layers versus nodes. I also use Photoshop and GIMP, and so if anyone is used to a 2D environment, you know about layers. Layers kind of work from the top down. They're an effective workflow, good for quick 2D tasks, but can be awkward to handle large amounts of elements. Although, you know, now with GIMP consolidating things in folders, much like Photoshop does, you can put a handle on it. But when I opened up the nodal system for the first time, I found, even though it looks complicated, you can actually follow all of those lines to see what's going on down the workflow at any given time. And you can almost set up like little mini layer sets and then put them aside and make up another little sort of set of layers and then combine them further down the workflow. It's actually quite intuitive, and at any point you can sort of see what you're doing along any step of the process. For those of you who know, it's a powerful system that combines render passes that you get out of the renderer to achieve fine-tuned results. All right, there are 4 main areas that I consider for rendering a convincing illustration, and the first, of course, is materials. I use a Toon shader, and I set it up in such a way that I don't use a lot of smoothness, and I want my highlights to be fairly specular. And that's kind of important for my purposes. It's not a very complicated setup. The default is pretty good. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, and then I'm off to the races, and all I generally do is sort of change the color. But one thing that I really like that 3D does, that 2D, you can't quite do in 2D if you're not as a talented illustrator as some people, and that is do things like reflections or refractions, and that's when you can actually use 3D and cheat a little bit. And so sometimes I'll take this basic material and then add something like a mirror effect on it. Lighting for toon shading is very simple. It generally requires something that will generate shadows. So something like a sun lamp or a basic spot is enough. And one lamp will often do the trick, but setting up like a backlight sometime or a fill light will give you a lot more flexibility in results. And of course, the main focus is rendering. Now, most of you are familiar with the renderer here. Yeah, hands up if you're not really familiar with the render settings, passes, layers. All right, a quick explanation. A Blender allows you to break up let's see how I can describe this. When you render an image, you have a lot of information in that image. The render allows you to break up that information and utilize these passes. And what you're looking at here is some information which shows you that I can isolate the color, the diffuse, specular, shadow, ambient, occlusion, and reflection passes. I can even switch off passes that I don't want Blender to tackle so that I can get a faster render. Up the top, if you just take a look, I've got a color layer as well as a freestyle layer, and I'll explain a little bit why I split it up that way. But using these passes will come a little bit clearer when you look at the compositing nodes. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Freestyle. I've only started using Freestyle. I used to use edges, and what I didn't like about edges was that if you take a curved object, it will render edges wherever a face meets another face. So you get a nice, clean, crisp edge, which is really nice for illustration work, but then you've got to do a lot of cleanup in 2D by erasing a lot of the edges that you didn't want in the first place. Freestyle seems to take a completely different approach, and this is I haven't looked at this for a month, unfortunately, been on the road. But it allows you to have almost complete control of what you look at to render edges and even how you render edges. One of the things that I found really cool, and it has kind of like a 2D analog, is using the camera to specify what edges are thicker and what edges are thinner. Coming from an inking environment, one thing that you learn very quickly is that when you draw, objects that are closer to you, you ink with fatter lines, and objects that are further away, you ink with thinner lines, so that you don't need as much detail. And by setting up just a simple thickness that is dictated by the camera, the distance the camera is to the object, you actually can simulate that effect. And once you've got your node set up, alternatives are very simple to get. So there's a black and white version, for example, but then just by adding the color node, you can get a color version. Obvious. And why I use this is because to save a lot of time, if I build a set or an object, I can then just set up another camera. My node setup is ready to go, and I just hit the render button again, and I get a different angle with the same shading and the same lighting and all that sort of stuff. These are two different backgrounds. They're just some speed lines I downloaded from a DeviantArt thing that was up for free, and you just composite them in the background. Here's one of the objects from Pandeia, sort of lit and rendered from different angles, and you can sort of see that instead of redrawing and redrawing, all I've got to do is set that up, and then I can take that element and stick it anywhere I want on the page, or even duplicate it if I need more than one object. All right, so I'm just going to see how my render's going, just to, how are we for time? We're pretty good. Now I'll see if I can describe this process as best I can. There's our render panel, which is the new render window over here. Now what I want to do is I want to take a look at these and show you how they correspond to the compositing node. Now, is there anyone who's not seen the compositing node before? So everyone kind of knows. I'm actually talking to composite. This is great. I can explain less. So obviously you know that the passes that you enable in the render settings show up on this window over here. as nodes that, passes that you can then play with. Of course, the most important pass that I find to get a good toon shade is the shadow pass. That's why I need clean, crisp shading so that I can get that lovely cell look. Now, what we're looking at here is the render. I think this is just the straight color layer. Yeah, it is. As opposed to, I don't know, why is this? Right, hang on a second. That's why. Let's bring this over here. If I had a little bit more time, I'd try to emulate this entire workflow, but I won't take you through that. It's quite involved. Let's try this. All right, so this is what it looks like composited. Now I'm wondering why. Where's my background layer? All right, the background layer obviously isn't working. So I will just try to see. Can everyone sort of see that with the alpha channel? You can already see that it looks toon rendered. I'll see if I can talk you through some of this workflow in the time that I have. All right, so obviously, because I'm talking to compositors, people who've worked with the nodal setup, you kind of know how to add nodes. The way I mix them together is, pardon me while I try to work a line from Command Shift left click, which is, right, Command Shift on the node. So I go on the node, Control Shift left click. Oh no, that duplicated it. I did what? This one here? More to the left. That one. Oh boy. I've erased it. I'm an expert in compositing, obviously. Control Shift on a node. Got it? Okay. Obviously. Okay, that's the node I want. Yes. View a node. And then it's empty. And it's empty. That's the line work.
It's just dark. It is there.
Yes, it's there. Oh, okay, cool. So I can actually Control Shift, click. Got it. All right. Thank you for that. I learn something new every day. One of the things is I've used it for 10 years, used Blender for 10 years, and I still feel like a noob because it's so dynamic. The community is always coming up with stuff, and there is so much stuff that I don't know, especially shortcuts, as you could tell. So let me take you through some of these nodes. This is the combination of pretty much just the ambient occlusion and shadow pass. And generally when I've got that, I'm already 80% on the way to getting a good toon shaded result. Now Control click, is that Control left click? Control Shift click, got it. So this is a combination of the, let's see now. Color and diffuse pass. And what's this? Yeah, this is the Freestyle. This is the Freestyle. So you can actually see the lines. Okay, that's what comes out of Freestyle. They then get combined. So over here, no. Let's undo that. That is a combination, obviously, of the shadow and ambient occlusion pass combined with the Freestyle pass. And then by then going over to the next node where I combine in the color and diffuse, you get that. And you can see how it slowly builds up until you get the result that you want. Now, I've done more complicated things along the way. such as mixing back in certain passes. I think I mixed in a specular pass at one stage. So that obviously gives you specular highlights. Going down another node. Am I losing anyone yet? No? Oh, this is great. What have I combined in this pass? I think it's the reflect node, and I've used an add filter to get a very specific kind of a highlight on the bottom down there. And you can sort of add in effects as you go. And one of my favorite is using, now let's see, does it work on nodes like this? Okay, that's just a glare filter. And what's, this image is what's not loading up. That's okay, that's just the background. But what I've got here is the glare filter, then being mucked about a little bit with RGB curves. What's alpha over here? Yeah, that's alpha over the image to give you the end result. And what I like about the glare and the glow filters is that, especially for manga, if any of you read manga, you obviously see line work, but then there's this beautiful kind of diffuse glow sometimes, and it's very easy to get with just like one node, which ultimately gives us this end result, which I think I've done right. So have I got time for questions, or do I have to go on to the next talk yet, Ton? He's fobbing me. Have I got time for questions, or should I go on to the next? Yes? All right, so I'll open up for questions. I hope I can answer some of them, but thank you very much for your time. Yes, first. Definitely. The question was?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. The question was, do I find that one node setup works across all areas, or do I find myself tweaking? See, the short answer is I find myself tweaking. As I'm working on Pandeia, what I want to do is set up a library of nodal setups so I can have, say, nighttime scenes, daytime scenes, desert, interior, cool room, warm room. But I often find that, my imagination runs away, and so I'm often tweaking on the fly. This scene's come up and I think, oh yeah, that's really cool, but the lighting isn't right. So yes, I'm always tweaking along the way. Any other questions? Okay. Oh yes.
So who are your influences?
Artistically? Probably the artists from the 70s and 80s who used to draw for Heavy Metal magazine. Richard Corbin, Jean-Gerard Mobius, Bernie Wrightson. More recently, people who've worked on X-Men, such as Chris Bachalo, Joe Madeira, those sorts of people. So in terms of 3D, talking from a 2D perspective, I needed to get it right. I don't generally like how Toon shading looks for animation, and that's sort of where we were at with illustration for a while. We were just sort of getting stills of that horrible, the Toon shade look? It's that sort of direct-to-DVD Disney Barbie videos that have that kind of the swimming cell shading, spots where obviously the mesh is a little bit wrong, that's sort of being filled in with cell shade. I didn't want that for the comic. It had to look good. And so when I came up with a system that gave me that, then I could sort of say, okay, this is worthy of a comic drawn by some of my influences that could be incorporated into a workflow with 2D. Yeah. The question was, how do I decide what's hand-drawn and what's 3D? The simple answer to that is what I can do the fastest in which medium. So I generally model things like vehicles and sets very, very quickly, so they are 3D. 2D, I generally hand-draw desert scenes and people very quickly. I'm working on sculpting characters, but I may need to work on a nodal setup for organics, which works better? I guess that's the final question. Okay, thank you very much for your time.
So for the streaming people, now they're listening somewhere, we are now moving to the talk from 1:30 from Roman about his short film project. We will try to do it in 20 minutes, and then the talk after this, I think Kinetic Bunny will start a little bit later. Kinetic Bunny people over here?
Right. So, seem to work perfectly. So you might have to. But I think it's going to work. In the middle?